Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who know that I love you is the only 3-word death sentence. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And this time we are reading mystery novels.
That's right, Zach. We are reading The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie, The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, Farewell, My Lovely by Raymond Chandler, and Vengeance is Mine by Mickey Spillane. Finally, A Murder of Quality by John le Carré.
And this time we got Vengeance is Mine by Mickey Spillane. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in talking about the distance between the critical reception of Mickey Spillane's work and my own personal reception. I love these books. I want to know if you love these books too.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in how Mike Hammer is a people person. And I think that's different from a lot of the other detectives that we've read. And I'm also interested in the same exact question. I texted you earlier today and said, am I an idiot? Or is Mickey Spillane a fantastic writer? I think there is flack, or people are disinterested, or his books have been a little bit forgotten, but he is great. Why do you say your idea of him is different from the perception today?
Well, I think there's two perceptions we need to contend with. One of which is the perception of critics at the time that he was writing. So he was one of the top-selling novelists in the world, but people essentially thought he was garbage. His character, Mike Hammer, was a violent psychopath going out on murderous rampages with no redeemable qualities. And I think that the view of the writing itself was quite poor. He famously wrote his novels in about 2 to 3 weeks. That's all it took him. And my understanding of what people thought was that the small amount of time he spent on the writing was reflective of the actual quality of the work. Now, so that's how people felt then. But how do people feel today? Well, as best as I can tell, people don't feel anything today because no one is reading Mickey Spillane today. There's very few videos on YouTube. There's very few podcasts, being made. And aside from you and me, I don't know anyone else who's read a Spillane novel outside of the people who joined us on our first 2 episodes about these books. So that's the situation as I see it.
I got a theory. I'm going to share it here in a second. But some of these old reviewers, when you're saying, okay, the critics when Mickey Spillane was coming out, and now people who just don't seem to care. But I want to read some quotes from what people were saying about him, especially the last one I want to come to. But someone, Malcolm Cowley, said that he was a homicidal paranoiac, describing Mike Hammer. John Coletti said that Mickey Spillane's writing was atrocious. Raymond Chandler called Spillane a writing gorilla and said pulp writing at its worst was never as bad as this stuff. So I think my theory is Raymond Chandler is just jealous of Mickey Spillane.
If you're following along, listeners, last week we read Raymond Chandler's Farewell, My Lovely. And both Bob and I described it as his sophomore slump. We loved The Big Sleep, but somehow that the next book that came, it felt to me like Chandler had moved into a satire of himself. His characters were no longer vital. They were just kind of shadows moving along a wall, puppets. But what is so interesting to me is that Spillane is oftentimes viewed as creating these caricatures of the hard-boiled detective. People say, this isn't a work of art. This isn't vital. This is something that's like a parody almost of what was happening in the decades before. But seeing these two figures together, I prefer the gorilla so much more. Mike Hammer feels incredibly real to me. And we should talk about why that is. But compared to Philip Marlowe, Mike Hammer is a character with a past, with a psychology, with desires, and a moral compass in a very weird way. He's a character who is ethical and good to his friends and loyal to his friends beyond the law, beyond merely, following the procedure of the law.
Zach, I did some research. You mentioned his friends, and I think his moral code and his commitment to his friends is very important. And since we read Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, we read Farewell, My Lovely by Raymond Chandler, and now Vengeance is Mine, Mickey Spillane. I was just curious about how often these friends use the words, how often these writers use the words buddy, buddies, or friend. I didn't look up pal because pal is just going to be, insulting someone, but I found out, so Spillane uses buddy 5 times, buddy 7 times, and friend or friends 37 times. Hammett uses neither buddy nor buddies, but friend 17. However, never once, I looked through all of them, never once is that ever about Spade having any friends. Friends is only used in a negative thing, and it's only for criminals. Only criminals have friends. Chandler uses
Spade
friends.
doesn't have any friends.
He doesn't have any friends, and he says that. No, you're right.
Yeah.
He has no friends. That's his thing. He doesn't trust anyone. No one trusts him.
Yeah.
Chandler, he mentions 30 friends 39 times, but only 3 times is that ever about Philip Marlowe. It's when he meets the beautiful red-headed man and he finally has a friend. But one of those 3 is when he says, I don't have any friends. However, Spillane mentioning it 37 times. So 18 of those are all about his friends. And he's always talking about his buddies, his war friends. The first book is about vengeance, paying back the man who killed his friend, or not the man, but chasing down the killer who killed his friend. The second is also vengeance against someone killed his friend who was a woman. And this time it's vengeance again, a friend who died. This is very much about friendship and respecting people, whereas the others seem like they don't care about anyone but themselves.
Themselves or money. I don't even think Spillane even has financial considerations in this book. And part of that might make it seem more fantastic than realist. And maybe people want a realist detective novel. Trying to put myself in the head of the critics. Like maybe they want detective fiction or crime fiction that is realist. But thinking back to anything we have read, not only in this segment of crime fiction or any other segment of crime fiction, can you think of anything that's actually been realist and not like a genre exercise? I mean, if you think of like the way that Agatha Christie novels play out, it's a closed room. Everyone knows everyone. It's a slow progression of unveiling how everyone has their own motive, but then we finally track down in a grand denouement scene who is the actual killer. The entire thing is an artifice, and it is a formula that is repeated again and again. But we love it for that artifice, and we love it for that formula. That's what makes good genre writing, or that's what makes genre, I should say. But when you move to hard-boiled detective fiction, Chandler famously said in his essay, The Simple Art of Murder, that what makes hard-boiled fiction good is that it becomes real. It's real crime. We're talking about the psychology of killers. And I bought what Chandler was saying when I read that. I said, yeah, that's right. The grit and the grime of San Francisco or LA it's how it is. But actually, no, it's not how it is. Like it's all of these books are just rewriting various tropes and experiences and characters who come from other places before. It's more of that repetition. And it's not a bad thing, but I think that we can say at this point that there are versions of that repetition that are more enjoyable than other versions of that repetition. Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, Mike Hammer. It's okay to have a preference, but we can recognize that they're all springing from the same source.
And they're all great. I mean, just because we didn't like Farewell, My Lovely, Big Sleep is a masterpiece, and Maltese Falcon was absolutely incredible. But I am such a gullible person. I mean, if you tell me that dragons are real in your book, I'm probably going to believe that dragons are real. So whether or not it's realistic as far as a crime world, this reader, is not going to notice. I think that what you're saying is absolutely true. And I think one way that we can see it is in the way that these authors talk about their fiction. As you just mentioned, Raymond Chandler in The Simple Art of Murder, he's saying, look, this is the real stuff. I'm no longer taking these puzzle boxes. They're fake. I'm going to give you the real deal. When I see Spillane talking about his own work, I think it's very different from the way those guys did, because there is a mystique for these writers. They are committed to writing, and they are committed to that realism as an art form. I guess, because Raymond Chandler is saying, look, there's a chance for detective fiction finally to be an art. And Hammett has started that. Everything up till now, including Agatha Christie, was never art. It's his claim. But then when you see Spillane talking in that interview that you and I watched with Ayn Rand and Spillane, we have to talk about that soon because that was extremely interesting. But he says, look, I love my camera because he made me a lot of money. And the interviewer says, surely you must like him for other reasons. He jokes again about making money. And then finally he goes into the seriousness of what he thinks is exemplary in my camera. But he will often discount or joke about his work. And I think people take that and they say, oh, he's not serious at all because he jokes. He also says that there's this famous quote from Spillane where he says, you can sell a lot more peanuts than caviar. He also says, violence will outsell sex every time, but together they'll outsell everything. So he sounds like someone who's just trying to get out there and make money. But do you think, laughing in the face of this mystique, is that his problem? Do we look back at that and think, oh, he doesn't care at all because he was laughing in the face of these giants who seem to care very much?
Yeah, the way an artist sells themselves is huge. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I have to wonder if his critical reputation was sabotaged from the very beginning because, Spillane's coming from a lower class background. He views himself as a working writer. He distinguishes between authors and writers. You know what I mean? Right. Writers are people who their full-time job is to write. And that doesn't mean that they're churning out Pulitzer novels. He says an author might get one or two good works out, but that's about it. And, if it hits, it hits. If it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. But a writer has to go to the desk and has to churn out something because his ability to put food on the table depends on that. And, Spillane's coming from the world of comic books, first and foremost. He was writing comics before he came into writing novels. I wonder if that aspect is also another critical sabotage for him.
Yeah, I bet these other guys probably don't take comic books seriously at all. I think it's pretty cool that he's doing that, He's experimenting in different genres. He's moving one from the other. And I think the way it's often characterized is that he started with, what are they called? The slicks, I think. So he was writing stuff that was illustrated, and then it moved down into comics. And people say he just kept going down into pulp. And then finally, when he was doing My Camera, they said, well, it's already so informed by pulp and comic books that it's just trash. It's completely unfair.
I also wonder if... the third knock against him is that it sold well. Anything that is popular can't be good, says, the critic. The person whose entire role is being a tastemaker or a gatekeeper or a great filter for people, telling them what is good and what is not good. The critic's role is to sort and tell you why they're sorting it, in the good or not good bucket. But if the public has already decided that they love something and they've made this author, he sold 200 million books in his lifetime, something like that. If the public has decided it's good, the critic can either say, oh, either I have democratic tastes and therefore the public doesn't need me to tell them what's good, or I stand against the public and maintain that kind of, individualized perspective. So maybe that is working against him.
Zach, that reminds me a lot of the interviews you sent me where Ayn Rand and Mickey Spillane, who were apparently, as soon as they met, best buddies, they said that they were supposed to talk for about 20 minutes and that conversation turned into a 6-hour conversation. I thought that was really interesting, especially in how they described their writing and they described the kind of heroes that they write. And it makes me think of this characterization of Spillane who... yes, he is making money and he is trying to make money, but he's also very committed to being a writer, not just an author who has one idea. He and Rand were talking about Hammer and then Ayn's different characters too. But he said that Hammer is a guy who goes, he knows what he wants and he goes after it and he takes it. And by the end of the book, he succeeds. And it's very different from Chandler, where at the end of every book, he's kind of left uncertain of what he's doing. As he uncovers things get more complicated and he doesn't actually solve anything. And he says, just open up any of today's novels. It's all about giving up. He didn't know, the character doesn't know what they're doing. They can't do anything and they can't help it. And she compares it to going through life like a drunk driver. And I feel like that's very different. My Camera is not that at all, but Philip Marlowe often is a little bit like that, especially in Farewell My Lovely, where he's in and out of consciousness. He just finds himself in these different situations and has to find himself out of them, or just strange stuff happens, but very different from Mike Hammer. What do you think about, the connection between Mickey Spillane and Mike Hammer, even Mickey Spillane playing Mike Hammer, but this idea of this will to power character, this very strong, as Ayn Rand says, they're the two of the last romantic writers where the strong hero actually succeeds.
Wait, when did Mickey Spillane play Mike Hammer? That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
One of the movies, and it's with one of the Bond girls.
What you said just put me in a, how did I put this? Like, it sent me on a memory trip of the last two books. And they're almost like existentialist novels in the sense, like, works by Jean-Paul Sartre or Albert Camus, in the sense that it is a morally gray world. And it's a world in which you don't even, so in the case of the Maltese Falcon, you don't even know who your friends are, or your lovers for that matter. There are no innate bonds of connection between people. In the case of the Raymond Chandler novel we read, there's no real logic that Philip Marlowe is following, if that makes sense. Like, he's going from place to place to place without a rudder. He'll find, three marijuana cigarettes, 3 joints on the body of a dead man, and then cut the joints open and find a business card for a psychic wrapped inside of the joints, and then go to that psychic looking for the next clue. The logic of those novels is not logic. It's the logic of dreams. It's the logic of nightmares even. But in this book, there are friends, there are ties, there's clear right and wrong. The bad guys are people who are objectively doing bad things to society. They're creating pornography, and they are using that pornography to blackmail people in power, and they're getting away with it because they have this blackmail hanging over everyone. And the way that Mike Hammer, the character, operates is quite logical. Yes, he uses violence. Yes, it is above the law and, gratuitous at times, but it at least values the idea of friendship, and it values the idea of operating rationally, I guess you could say, moving the plot logically from A to B to C.
I think what you said is very, very interesting. And it's not just like a black and white, good guys, bad guys. That is going on, but there are people double crossing him. There are people in disguise. But I think the most interesting, there's lots of interesting things. One of the most interesting things about his values here is he's suffering a lot. And even though he's suffering, he's still going to go and do the right thing. Philip Marlowe does a lot of things that are kind of, he gets that one woman drunk. She's an alcoholic, and he knows that she'll start to tell him information about the case. And he says, "Oh, wow, I'm really proud of myself" at the end of it. Mike Hammer gets himself into trouble. He's a little bit appetitive. He follows the wrong people sometimes, and he will follow and do things that he knows is a little bit wrong. But I think the most interesting is when he's thinking about people he's killed in the past, and he starts seeing their faces everywhere. There's weird connections to mythology in this book. We have one character named Juno, and he does that on purpose, and he keeps referring to her, as the god of marriage, the god over the lesser gods. And he says, "Am I coming up to Olympus?" Blah. There's lots of little sexual puns, but that character sets off this weird reaction in his mind, and he starts seeing all of these faces. And he goes up to her apartment at one point, and it's like he's in Olympus. It's like he's in paradise. And when he comes back down, it's like he's trapped in Hades. And all of these past things that he's done haunt him, and he can't escape them. So while he is not ever valiant, but he is someone who believes in what he's doing, he has a cause, and he must, he's the hammer, he must go and do it. But he still is a person, and he has a conscience, and he suffers greatly because of that. So there's a tragic element, even though it always turns out to be a victory at the end. There is tragedy all throughout these books.
Let me read that section you were just describing, because I saved this. It's a little bit long, but it's frankly, it's so beautiful.
It's good.
It's incredible writing. So to set the stage, he's in the room, beautiful woman, Juno. "I love beautiful things," she said. "So do I. Juno turned her head and a pleased smile flashed at me for a second and disappeared. The devils in her eyes laughed their pleasure too, and she walked to her desk. That was when the gray light from the window seeped into the softness of her hair and turned it into a gold that made my heart beat against my chest until I thought it would come loose. There was a bad taste in my mouth. My guts were all knotted up in a ball, and that damnable music began in my head. Now I knew what that creepy feeling was that left my spine tingling. Now I knew what it was about Juno that made me want to reach out and grab her. She reminded me of another girl. A girl that happened a long time ago. A girl I thought I had put out of my mind and forgotten completely in a wild hatred that could never be equaled. She was a blonde. A very yellow, golden blonde. She was dead, and I made her that way. I killed her because I wanted to, and she wouldn't stay dead. I looked down at my hands, and they were shaking violently. The fingers stiffened into talons that showed every vein and tendon. Mike? The voice was different. It was Juno, and now I knew what it was. I could stop shaking. The gold was out of her hair. So incredible, like a scene of reverie where he's in a position where he's basically about to sleep with this girl, but then the way the light hits her hair reminds him of another woman, and just the dynamic of that I think is incredible. But also the way that Spillane writes bodily sensations. What that does is it locks up his spine and sends tingles up it. It causes his hands to shake violently and the fingers to stiffen into talons that show every vein and tendon. My God, this is incredible descriptive writing. It does not get the credit that it deserves. And it's all throughout the book. The whole book is overflowing with this.
My favorite part of that, too, is the leitmotif. It's similar to what we read with Dan Simmons' Song of Kali, where the main character will hear the Song of Kali and he's going to go too far. He's trying to avoid violence. He said violence is never the answer. And then finally, he's like, everything's been taken away from me. I'm going to go and do a lot of violence. And he hears this terrible song of violence in his head, and he finally decides, no, I won't do this. But Mike Hammer is hearing these drums and these things telling him to go out and kill because of all these bad things that have happened to him, because of the vengeance he needs to make happen. But he also decides no. And the weird mythological aspect of it, you already described it and how beautiful that section is interesting, because it also follows with, after that wonderful time up in Olympus, he keeps hearing these songs again and again and again. And one of the final moments when he has to kind of know that she is not going to be the answer, because he starts to fall in love with this Juno. He kind of falls in love with every character, but he is going to go too far with Juno, and he talks about being up in Olympus, and then he is having the sleep of the dead, he says, and the drums come back, the faces come back, but the thing that saves him is like his Beatrice or his Beatrice. He says, a face with clean beauty and a strength to face even the dead. It challenged the golden hair and the music, commanding it to stop and disappear forever. And it did. I heard my voice again saying over and over, Velda, thank God, Velda, Velda, Velda. What do you think about Velda? Such a cool character.
I love Velda. Velda is so good. The whole time, like the whole dynamic with Velda has developed in a really interesting manner between books 1, 2, and 3. This is probably as good as Velda gets. I mean, I can't wait to read book 4, but Velda is a fully developed character. She's got a gun. She's out collecting clues on her own and doing things on her own and bringing them back to Mike. And that moves the plot forward. It's not all, she's out doing things, but that's not what interests me. What interests me most was their dynamic, their sexual tension. When we were reading that last run of romance books, I felt kind of bad because I kept being like, man, none of these dynamics are like interesting or hot or like good. This dynamic is so incredible. He clearly loves her. He can't say that he loves her because he feels like if he fully discloses to her, it will be a death sentence to her. I love you is a death sentence. It's happened 2 times before, and he knows what will happen a 3rd time if he says it to Velda. Velda is very interested in him, but because he won't commit to her, she started seeing other people. She's dating around occasionally. And for work, she has to pretend to be in love with someone or interested in someone. And this makes Mike crazy. But all she says, you just have to say the words and I'm yours forever. And then on top of that, you have a walking HR violation workplace dynamic where he's the boss of her. And there's that like professional tension, but then it's swapped and she becomes the boss of him. But that like dynamic is maintained. I cannot speak highly enough of how good like the sexual tension between these characters is in this book. I love it. What did you think?
I got another theory that's going to get us into trouble. I think that, oh no, here we go. I think this is a romance, or I think Mickey Spillane is writing romance for men, and maybe hardboiled detective fiction is romance for men, because I was thinking this experience reading this of being really invested, worried, wanting to see them kiss, thinking someone's going to get in a fight, someone's going to come in between them at every turn. I was like, where have I read this before? Oh, Lost and Lassoed by Lila Sage with Gus and Teddy. I was like, oh my God, this is a romance book. It's interesting because it always gets like almost explicitly sexual, but it never really does in these books. Whereas in Lila Sage books, it gets, it's got erotic, which gets very descriptive in those. But I feel like the tension and the plot structure is very similar, where you have two people coming together. The reader's very excited. Oh, yes, it's going to finally work. And then tragedy strikes and they're separated again. It's also like a Shakespeare play where you get you have the comedy, but there are all these different blocks keeping them apart. And you're hoping they're going to come together. But here's a big difference, I think. Because a comedy must always end in the couple getting together. A romance must end in a happily ever after or a happily for now. But like we saw in James Bond, at least the first one, Casino Royale, if James Bond gets married, that's the end of the series. And now the same thing, if Mike Hammer and Velda get together, or like if Mulder and Scully get together, that's the end of the series.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think you're totally right in pegging this as a romance book. And I think that everything in here that's not romance. Okay, well, actually, let me back up. Because that was something I noticed to myself. I cared wholeheartedly about the romance of this story. I did not give a rat's behind about the crime aspect of the story. Like, I did not care about solving the murder. You know what I mean? Like, I was interested to see what happened, but I wasn't like emotionally invested in solving the murder or avenging the murder of his old buddy. And I think that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about like what is the engine of this book, where the gasoline is in this. Sex and violence, just like old Mickey Spillane said. I will say it was also kind of a good opportunity of self-reflection for me. You already compared it to Lila Sage's Western romance novels, but like it made me be like, I think for a romance novel to work, I personally need, as a reader, some kind of like intellectual, moral, or emotional block. So that's intellectual, I guess, would be the HR violation / moral, and then emotional block. He's already gotten 2 women killed. He can't get another killed by saying, I love you. That is interesting. Most romance novels that we've read have the most paper thin reasons why they can't get together. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, well, if we got together, it would be awkward at the ball,
Thanksgiving, at the ball.
Yeah. And it just makes me wonder if we've been reading the wrong romance novels. Can we find romance novels that are a little bit more saucy like this one? I don't know. Open questions. Listeners, if you have any recommendations, please leave a comment.
I also am mostly interested in in all of the sexual tension. I won't even say sexual tension, just all of the like eros of like, oh, we could be together, or maybe I should be together with her, or with her, I can't be together with Velda, or she'll die. That is the most interesting. But I'm still pretty invested in the mystery because There is the bromance thing that's going on here also reminds me of kind of B plots in the Lila Sage books, where it's like friends growing apart or friends trying to maintain their relationship while this new relationship is sparking. But here the problem is his best friend is murdered. The beginning is Mike Hammer is passed out in a room, and his best friend of the time at that moment has apparently shot himself. It looks like he's dead in the hotel room. Mike Hammer wakes up after he's hungover. He's too drunk. What happened? And people think that maybe he killed him, or that it was his gun, and it was a suicide. Then for the rest of the novel, obviously it's a detective novel, so he has to go and find out who killed Chester Wheeler. But there's something also that is interesting for Mike Hammer as a character, because he's kind of fixated on it. It's almost like a neurosis, because whenever he goes out and has fun, he goes to meet Juno at the club, he goes to see Velda, he reminds himself, I can't stop thinking about my friend. I got to track down who killed him and avenge my friend. And he even says, there's this scene where it's in like the kind of Juno's club, and it's a madhouse. But then he says, then I got mad again because it was my friend that died. My friend, not somebody else's. A guy who was glad to see me even after 5 years. A guy who was on the same side with me and gave the best he could to save some bastard's neck so that bastard could kill him 5 years later. So every time he moves beyond it, he comes back. He's stuck. He's stuck in the system back and forth. I think that was really interesting, and it even infects his dreams. He is so dedicated to his brothers in arms or anyone that he's been a buddy with, because he has these war buddy dreams. And he says, he falls asleep and he says, I dreamt I was in a foxhole with the shelter half dragged over me to keep out the rain. The guy in the next foxhole kept calling to me until my eyes opened and my hand automatically reached for my rifle. There was no rifle, but the voice was real. And he's back in reality. But his dreams are about trying to protect someone, trying to protect his friend. Even though it's subtle and it's kind of washed over by the mystery side of it, I think the more interesting part of this mystery is that it's based on a friendship. And we've never seen that in any of the other detective stories about anyone that we've read that's a detective writer.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest critique of Hammer is that Hammer is a one-dimensional character, but actually, he seems to me, as best as I can tell, the only detective that we've seen that actually has a psychology. He has dreams that are meaningful. He has interiority. He has dreams that are meaningful to him as a character and him as motivations and him as a desiring person. I thought this Spillane's use of the dream sequence, which happens a couple times in this book, was actually, it's so small. It's such a small detail, but it totally sets him apart from other writers of this genre.
One more element that I think raises this up is kind of straddling two things we've been talking about, the relationship with Velda and this kind of need for vengeance. Mike is someone who, as Mickey Spillane describes, knows what he needs to go. He's a giant of literature. He knows what he needs to get, and he goes and does it. This plot is quite similar to The Big Sleep, where you're breaking up a prostitution ring that is, also related to blackmail, and there's secrets all around, and you expose them one by one, and you come closer to the person at the top. Of course, in Big Sleep, we never figure out exactly, but here we do, and Mike Hammer puts them to justice. But I think the stakes are very high in this, and they are interwoven really well, because he and Velda come up with this plan where Velda is going to seduce the guy who's, what's his name? Clyde. His real name is, what is it? Dinky something. Yeah. And there's a great line which is, Dinky got too big. So it's like this little criminal who becomes a big criminal and becomes the biggest criminal in the city. And he changes his name to Clyde because Dinky doesn't sound very good. But Velda says, look, I'm going to go and get as much information as I can from Dinky. They don't know yet that he is involved in all these murders. They just suspect that he's a bad dude. But they start finding out there is a serial killer on the loose. Girl after girl who's been involved in these pornographic pictures. Each one is being murdered. And now they finally realize that, and Mike Hammer has to go and tell Velda this, like, you have to get out of there. You have to get out of there. This is really bad. This is much worse than we thought. He's already told her again and again, please don't do this. You're going to get hurt. She says, no, I am going to take him down. But the stakes become really high, and the There's chase scenes, there's fights at the end of the book. The action, though, is warranted, and it's very interesting. We've read lots of books now where there's action that's just stupid, and we just want it to end. I was kind of on the edge of my seat with this because I want to know if Velda is going to be okay and what Mike is going to be, if he's going to be able to save her in time. What did you think of the action in this book?
Yeah, I love the action. I agree with you. And I was trying to figure out as I was reading, why do I like this action whereas I don't like other actions? And to do that, I think I want to bring us back to our 2 previous books. Sam Spade, when does he go out? Well, he gets drugged. The only time that he ever has anything bad happen to him is he takes a drink and it knocks him out on the floor. But other than that, he's lifting people up by their necks and throwing them into desks. Same with Philip Marlowe. He's beating the hell out of people, and people, occasionally get to him, but he's the kind of person who, like, a big guy punches him in the face and he says his head didn't even move. He takes punches like they don't even feel anything. And that's part of his characterization, is that he is so tough that he doesn't even feel pain, like the reader feels pain. The effect of these 2 previous writing styles that I'm talking about is to distance the reader from what I'm reading. I no longer empathize with those 2 other hard-boiled characters. Mike Hammer, totally different. When Mike Hammer gets punched, Mickey Spillane does this really great body description writing where he tells you exactly which bones he feels it in. So he gets hit in the back of the head and it pops his shoulder blade out of alignment and he feels tingling down, his back. I think we've all lifted something that's a little too heavy and then you suddenly are like, oh no, that was not good. Spillane clearly has too, because he writes in a way that manages to capture those feelings of pain in a way that you recognize. You feel every hit with Mike Hammer. And somehow in doing that, it makes Mike Hammer, not only more tough, because when he gets back up, you're like, wow, he's really doing it. But also it makes him feel more human and like the stakes are there. This is a person who can feel pain. And I know that because I have felt Mike Hammer's pain before.
It's a lot like one of the reasons we liked The Shootist by, I think, Gwendolyn Swarthout. The detail of what bone is being hit, when the bullets go into people, why it's hurting them exactly, the specificity of it, almost, a little bit Homeric. We liked the Iliad too, about things being very particular where they go. I think what I really like too, the climax is almost like a romance climax because it's Velda and Mike together and they've overcome the bad guy. They're going to take him down, and then another bad guy shows up behind them, knocks Mike out or knocks him down, takes the gun, and now they're doomed. However, it's not Mike who saves the day. It's suddenly Velda, because no one expects her to have another gun up on her shoulder. She takes the shoulder mount off and gets her pistol, shoots one guy. They go after and chase the other guy. So Velda is the one actually who is the most action hero at that final moment. Very exciting.
Well, I can't believe that we only have one mystery novel left. And it's a controversial pick for our mystery inclusion because it's by a espionage author. So all I can say is that I can't wait to do this again so that we can read more Mickey Spillane, because this is my guy. And reading him this time, I got a few other authors who are kind of in his vein that I'm hoping we can explore next time. So
I look forward to it.
Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.